everybody! Welcome to the Rocky Intertidal Zone. I'm Debbie.
I'm Callie, and we're both educators at Project O, and we are here in Groton, Connecticut, along the shores of Long Island Sound.
Share in the comments where you're watching from. We're excited to meet you.
While you're doing that, we're going to switch our view so you have a chance to see everything that we're seeing. So here are some of the rocks in the intertidal zone. Hi Hazel, hi Marissa, welcome, we're glad you're watching. Hi Kyle, we're glad you're watching. This is out in Long Island Sound. Beautiful day, we're enjoying the fresh air out here. And you can see some of those rocks closest to the water have seaweed on them. And as we start moving up the beach, you can see there are lots of rocks that are really dark color. And all the way at the top part of the beach, the rocks really start to change and their color is much lighter. Now, if you're out exploring the intertidal, be careful. It's a slippery place, Debbie.
It sure is. I like to tell students to watch out for the rocks that are dark colored like this. So this area is called the Rocky Intertidal Zone because it's rocky, and it's the place that's between the high tide and the low tide mark. So I want you to take a look at our picture and figure out what tide state we are in right now. Are we high tide or low tide?
Giving you the whole view again so you can make your best prediction here.
How would we know that?
Well, I've got a clue, Debbie. If we take a look right at the rocks over your shoulder, we can see that some of them are really dark and some of them are really light. The highest high tides go to where those dark rocks change to that light color, and that's a clue. That's how we know how far the high tide waters go.
Well, I'm not standing in the water right now.
Nope.
The water's not reaching to the high tide mark, so you guessed low tide. You're absolutely right.
All right.
We checked a tide chart, a tide prediction chart, before we came out here today. Low tide is going to be just before 10 a.m. today, so the tide is still it's way up just a little bit further, but the water is very low right now, so we have a lot of to explore.
Excellent. Debbie, I just wanted to say hi to Iris from Mystic who's joining us. Hi to Justine from Wallingford who's joining us. Hi to Lisa. We're happy to have you all with us today. If you're just tuning in, this is Debbie and Callie. We're here at the Rocky Intertidal in Groton, Connecticut, and we are going to show you how this is a really dynamic environment and also talk to you about some of the challenges that you might face if you were living here. We've got a couple of friends kind of joining us also. If you can see in the distance, we've got a couple of gulls out here. But now that we know that the tide is low, let's think about one of the tricky things that might encounter living here, some of the challenges. What do you think? Debbie, do you have any ideas what it might be like to live here?
Well, if I were an organism that lives in the Rocky Intertidal Zone, sometimes my habitat is completely covered by water. And sometimes my habitat is high and dry, totally exposed to the air right now. That means there are a lot of changes happening with my environment. Sometimes if I need to breathe the water, and the water's not here, I need to have some adaptations to survive in the air. When the water is low, like it is right now, there's some predators who might be able to get me that would not be trying to eat me when the water is high. And of course, there could be changes in the salinity of the little water that's trapped in pools here too. So it could get really salty in that water as the water retreats. So it's a pretty challenging place to survive.
Absolutely. So I'm wondering if we want to take a closer look and see what kinds of organisms are living here. And so if you have some ideas, post them in the comments. What kinds of living things would you expect to find here in this Rocky Intertidal? And while you're doing that, I think, Debbie, the first place we should take a look is maybe on top of these rocks. Let's get a closer view and see what kinds of things that we can find. Hi, Anna. Hi, Carter. Thanks for watching.
Oh, wow. Look at these.
All right. Sorry we lost you there for a second, everybody, but we're back.
It's Debbie and Callie back on the Rocky Intertidal Zone.
So we are talking about some of the creatures that we're finding here in the intertidal. And so we're starting to take a closer look at those periwinkle snails.
Yeah, they're little snails. And they're pretty well adapted for this environment. Oh, I had to kind of pull a little bit to get that snail off. So they are algae munchers. They like to climb up and down the rocks using a really strong muscle called a foot. And so they can climb up and down to meet the changing tide. They can come up to find some water, or you can see that they had a little bit of water trapped right inside their shells. So they can cement themselves onto the rock using a little substance they secrete, and they can hold on real tight and trap water in there until the tide comes back and they can get some more water to eat. So they're pretty good climbers.
Excellent. We actually have a few of those periwinkles over here in a container. So we want you to take a closer look at them, and hopefully we're going to be able to show you their foot. And their foot is really good at allowing them to stick onto things like rocks in the intertidal. So can you see that one at the top of our container? The sort of circular shape that you're looking at is the foot, and it's really kind of sticky, and it helps them to cruise along the rocks, and it allows them to hold on during a storm, for example, or even just as the tide comes in.
I can actually see their little eye stalks right here. This snail is sensing its environment as it climbs. It's probably realized it's reached the top of the waterline.
Excellent. So if you're just joining us, sorry that we lost you. It cut out for just a minute before, but we're here in Groton, Connecticut on the Rocky Intertidal. We're looking for creatures, and so far we have spotted the periwinkle snail. Let's see if we can find a couple other organisms. Ooh, this rock looks really good, Debbie. If everyone takes a close look, it almost looks like there's teeny white volcanoes covering this rock, right?
Volcanoes? Anybody watching the video know what these are? They're not volcanoes.
Not a volcano at all. These are living animals. We call them barnacles. So if you said barnacles, you're right. And so these are adult barnacles, the large white ones that you can see. And right now they're closed up so tightly. Why do you think that might be?
Maybe that's an adaptation, just like our periwinkles had.
Ah.
But wait a second, I don't see them moving like the snails.
No.
How did they get here?
Well, if you watched us last week, do you remember how some of our educators towed a plankton net? That plankton net is how these animals actually started their life. They started their life off as plankton. And once they get big enough, they pick a spot, and that's where they'll stay for their whole entire lives.
Pretty cool. Good luck, barnacles.
Oh, Emily and Greta both knew it was barnacles, Debbie.
Oh, sweet. Good job, Emily and Greta.
All right, so why don't we take a peek at some of the other living things on the rocks here. And we're gonna get a little bit closer to the water.
A lot of snails and a lot of barnacles. Let's see a plant growing.
Oh yeah, let's take a closer look at that.
There's plants growing here. This one has a pretty good name for the type of plant it is. This is called a rockweed. Makes sense, right? I know it's rockweed because it has this line, this midrib going along the plant right there. Now, there are 3 different colors of algae or seaweed in the oceans. What colored algae do you think this one is?
Sometimes it's tricky to tell, but if you said brown, you are right. So we've got brown algae and greens and reds, and these browns are really common in the intertidal. And usually we find them closest to the water. So you can see we've got a little closer down on the beach. We're looking out at Long Island Sound again. And now Debbie's actually got a second kind of algae here.
This is also a brown algae. This one's called bladderwrack. But they have a couple of things in common. They've got sort of these little air-filled pockets here that you can actually kind of pop when you squeeze them. What do you think those are good for?
Well, I'm gonna let everybody see what we can see out here again. Right on the edge of the water, what you're noticing are all those little pockets of air floating up towards the surface. So that helps those algae to reach the sunlight so they can photosynthesize.
That's a pretty cool adaptation.
Absolutely.
Well, how do they not wash out to sea every time the tide goes out?
Good question. We said this can be a really challenging place to live with lots of waves. And what we have, Debbie's trying to point to you here, is something called a holdfast. Think of it kind of like the root of the seaweed or like an anchor. And that can attach.
It's on really tight.
Yeah, it can attach to the rock. So when the waves come, those seaweeds stay right in place.
Pretty cool adaptation for surviving a challenging area.
Absolutely. All right, so now we've showed you some of the friends that we can find living on top of the rocks. Let's see what kinds of things we can find underneath the rocks. So again, during this low tide, there are predators such as birds that may be coming into this area. Again, there are some gulls hanging out there. And so some of the animals that live here will actually hide underneath the rocks, A, for protection, and B, because there's usually a little bit of water trapped underneath. And that might... Excellent.
How did he even fit under there?
That might be a good place for them to hide. Look! Nice skills, Debbie. This guy is fast. So this is one of the local species here that we find quite abundantly. This is an Asian shore crab.
I could tell from its stripy legs.
Yeah.
That's one good way to tell. It must be hard to fit in between those rocks. That animal's well adapted to do that.
Absolutely. Let's see if we can get a better view. Can you see that little guy? Let's see if I can.
That seagull must have to work very hard for its breakfast.
Absolutely.
Let's see if I can find any friends for that crab under these rocks.
All right. So Debbie's searching.
Oh, I found just the tiniest one. Oh, and a big one in the sand there too. He was kind of burrowing down into the sand.
Oh, it's all covered.
This one has both of its claws. The other one lost one. But the good news is they can regenerate them. They can grow them back after they have lost a claw. So that other crab will be just fine if you're concerned.
So again, if you're just tuning in, we're here in Groton, Connecticut. Debbie and I are exploring the Rocky Intertidal. So far, we've had a chance to check out some barnacles and periwinkle snails. We're looking at different kinds of seaweeds, and now we are searching for crabs right underneath the rocks here. So if you're in the intertidal, you might want to have a bucket next time you go exploring, and that's a good place where you can keep some of your creatures and critters while you're exploring. So we want to show you a few of the things that we have in our bucket.
Oh, looks like just a couple snails, right, Callie?
Oh yeah.
Until you move the rock.
Look at all those crabs.
We did a little crab grabbing before we started going live, so you could see all the crabs that are hiding under these rocks today. So they have pretty flat bodies. That is a help to them to fit underneath the rocks. But they also are pretty good at adapting to all different kinds of environments too. So they could be in the sand under those rocks as well and trap some water in their gills so they can breathe the oxygen slowly over time. Pretty pretty good adaptation for hiding in the intertidal zone, huh, Callie?
Absolutely.
I'm gonna put our new friend in here if he lets go of my glove. Well, since it's not, we could talk about how to tell males from females in these crabs if you want.
Okay.
Never mind. He's like, well, don't look at me there. All right, if we look at the underside of the crabs, they have a structure that's right in the middle there. And on a male, it'll look very narrow, like a lighthouse almost. On a female, it's more of a triangle shape. I'm going to see if I can find an example of both.
All right, and while you're looking for that, Malcolm, these are Asian shore crabs. That's the species that we find here actually very commonly under the rocks along the rocky shore. Once in a while, we find other species like the chocolate-fingered mud crab. We haven't been able to collect one of those ourselves today. Actually, everything in our bucket is that Asian shore crab. So Debbie is looking carefully for a female.
All right, so I got a male on my palm and a female on my fingertip. Can you see the difference between the undersides of their body? Why do you think the female has a different shape underneath her body? It's on purpose. It's a deliberate thing. It's not just a coincidence that they're a little different.
If you said it has to do with their young, then you were right. The female is actually the one that holds the eggs. So again, this is another creature that starts its life off as a plankton. So when those baby crabs hatch out of the eggs, they drift in the water column for a few weeks as plankton until they're big enough and old enough to sink down to the bottom. Some of you might be wondering about their size. The crabs that we're looking at here today, these are their adult size. So they're actually a fairly small crab. If you've ever been crabbing and got blue crabs, for example, those can get much, much larger. But what Debbie's showing you in her hand right now, that's a pretty typical size for this species. And yes, if you're wondering why they're called the Asian shore crab,
they're from Asia.
Yep. So this is actually an invasive species, and we've been seeing them here since about the 1980s. They came into New Jersey, and they've been working their way up the coast since. So it is actually an invasive, and it is one of the most commonly found crabs here in the intertidal.
Well, there are tons more things in the intertidal for us to explore, but we're going to save that for another day. I hope you guys tune in with us on Thursday. Kyle and Marissa have something in store for you, so tune in, Facebook Live at 9:30. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, and we wanted to also say if you have questions that we didn't get to today during this live feed, we'll be happy to answer them in the comments, so make sure you check back. All right, thanks so much, and we'll see you again on Thursday. Bye.